So the first thing maybe to mention is, so at least right now, all of our LLM functionality is provided through different APIs from different providers of LLMs like OpenAI or Anthropic or Google and so on. Maybe in the future we'll have more support for locally running LLMs, but for now it's all through APIs. So if you want to actually run anything, generally speaking, if you just run any of the LLM-based functions, the first time you run it, a dialog window will come up and basically ask you to put in an API key. But in general, if you want to make sure that you have a connection that's working, you can always just run something like this. And if this returns this returns a service object that says connected. And so that kind of tells you that it's working, that you are connected to your OpenAI account in this case. The most basic function that you'll be using to contact LLMs is LLM Synthesize. LLM Synthesize deals with probably the majority of cases where you want to call an LLM. And this is a very simple function. It basically just takes a string and returns a string. We have a symbol called LLM prompt. So an example of a pre-made common prompt is one, I think it's called nothing else. Right, so now we get this template object, and if I open it up here, but basically this shows what the actual prompt is. So in this case, it's just a bunch of text that's similar to this sentence I wrote here. So LLM function is essentially a generic wrapper around LLMs that lets you call an LLM on sort of data structures that aren't just text. Right, I can write a prompt here, something like reverse this string, and that represents this LLM function here, which basically contains this prompt. And now I can apply that function to anything I want. So in this case, I'll apply it to a string that's like, hello there. And this will go to the LLM, and then we'll get back this response here. So chat object is used to represent chats. So here we have just sort of an empty chat here. And then we can use chat evaluate to basically send a message, post a message to a chat, and then get a response. So here I'll maybe write chat evaluate. I'll give it the chat and I'll ask it, hello, how are you? Right, and now this returns a new chat that basically has my message added to it, followed by a message written by the model here. So basically all the functions we've talked about so far have an option that lets you set this. And the option is called LLM Evaluator. I can now provide another option called LLM Evaluator, where I can then give it some other settings. So for example, I could say something like temperature arrow 0. It essentially sets how much randomness to put into it. So if you set temperature to 0, then it'll actually make it deterministic. So if I run this multiple times, it should pretty much always return the same result. Another thing that you can set in the LLM Evaluator are things like what model to use. So here, this is where you would say something like model arrow GPT-4 if you wanted to say use GPT-4 to write your koala poem. There's a global variable called LLM Evaluator, which basically represents the full kind of configuration of the LLM that you use by default. So if I set this to something like this basically just represents the default configuration, but with these two prompts. Then now any call I make to an LLM, asking it, say, what is a circle, will have these prompts prepended to it. One last thing I'll mention that you can provide inside of the LLM Evaluator is tools. Basically a way of giving the LLM access to sort of generic functions that might be useful for it to make its response. So I could write something like this. So I'll tell it there's a tool called City Population Finder. It takes a city as a parameter, and the parameter is of type city. So this syntax is all kind of analogous to to how API function works. So now I'll maybe have that tool there. And now if I run LLM synthesize and say, write a few sentences about Chicago, and then I'll provide it with an LLM evaluator that has this tool, tell it explicitly, use the tool. Right, so now you see it says, right, Chicago has a population of approximately 2,746,388 people. And I think that's the response that came from the tool.